you have to make bold bets even when things are going well, or else at some point growth slows. And I intend on growth being faster in 2025 than it was in 2024. Your finance team or the board, like, make your own determination of what's possible, and don't go shoot for the number. Go shoot for what's possible. If I could really like run the table, like, then where do we end up?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Bravado podcast. Our goal here with the Bravado podcast is to find the CROs, VPs of sales, sales leaders who are building legendary companies and sales teams, and pick their brain, go super deep with them in terms of the people, the process, the tools, so that you yourself can adopt a lot of their learnings and take your company from where you are today to where you're trying to go. And joining me today is the legendary CRO of Owner.com, Kyle Norton, previously led sales at Shopify. Kyle, welcome to the Bravado pod, man. So excited to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, this is going to be a lot of fun. I want to start off with a quick thing, which is that I saw that you had a background in martial arts. Maybe you could share a little bit about that. I'd be super interested to hear.
Yeah, so when I was 17, I think like many, sort of the early days of the UFC, just was enthralled with that as a sport, and especially, watching Royce Gracie, who was a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy, 160 pounds, tapping out like massive behemoth dudes and boxers and wrestlers and all this stuff, and sort of tiptoed my way into like, oh, maybe I'll learn a little bit about this Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu thing, and signed up for like a 2-day-a-week pass. Then like 2 weeks in, I'm like, hey, I actually want to do 4 days a week. And then the next week I was adding boxing and wrestling. And by the end of that summer, I was training like 3 hours a day, 6 days a week. And it became like the only thing I cared about for the better part of 8 years. And so like I went down to train and compete in Brazil with our top team there. I competed a bunch locally. I co-owned for a long time a mixed martial arts academy that I started with my coach at the time. So it was definitely like a obsession of mine. And I give martial arts a lot of credit for who I became as a business leader, just because you learn like in pretty incredible resilience, and you learn how to learn because it's so like tactical. Like, you learning and getting better faster means you don't get beat up so much. So there's a very, very like tactical feedback loop. Then so a lot of how I teach sales today is built in some of that learning methodology that I learned in martial arts.
They say that, sales is all about getting punched in the face and getting back up. And, it seems like you've got a really strong perspective on doing that literally.
Yeah.
That you're able to bring that figuratively to your sales teams. How did you end up getting from martial arts into SaaS sales?
Like most people, I just fell into it out of college. There was an events company that hired out of our business program. It was like one of the very few sales roles that were available. And a woman who graduated a year ahead of me was at this company and made like $100,000 in her first year and was getting promoted to manager. I was like, that's what I want. I wanted a job where my accomplishments and success would determine my trajectory. And, most of my schoolmates who went into consulting and banking and CPG marketing, like, that was a very fixed roadmap of how fast you could progress, and just the meritocracy of sales spoke to me. So I just, like randomly stumbled into it. And then I was there for 4 or 5 years. Boiler room type environment, like cold calling 150, 200 dials a day type of thing, and learned a lot of the like really, really core skills of persuasion. It was awesome. And then eventually graduated into other stuff. Like I cold called my way into my first tech job. Actually cold called Mark Bergen, who was the EVP of sales at Vision Critical, and then ran revenue at Shopify later. So I tagged along with him there. And cold called him for that job because my resume wasn't super compelling. Like, I was a second line leader at this like shitty events company. But I knew how to sell. I just needed to prove that to somebody, and through the cold call and a conversation, then broke my way into tech, where I ran a global BDR team for a little while there.
You want to talk a little bit about one of the things you and I have talked about is, a lot of times as a salesperson, you can spend so much effort and energy selling a really shitty product at a shitty company and getting nowhere. And that if you join a really great company with a really great product and maybe even only work 75% or 80% as hard, you can still get much more in terms of results and quota and whatnot. And then the magic intersection of great product meets great work ethic and ability is where the really amazing stuff happens. Would love to hear your perspective on like selling a shitty events product and then moving into selling Shopify and now Owner, and what you've learned and what you might advise someone who is starting out in terms of how important is it to pick the right company and the right product versus just getting a roll in.
It's interesting because I think a lot of the success I've had in my career is because I started with a pretty crappy product. Like when you were calling customers who had come to our events previously are like, no, that wasn't very good. Like, don't call me again. Like that was the quality of the product we were selling. And so you really had to learn how to sell around that and spin and we probably took it too far, to be honest. Like where you could sell anything or you could say anything to get a deal done. But doing the hard thing was actually really formative for me. And yet, like I wouldn't have had the career trajectory that I've had now if I had kept in this sort of market. And so I think in early career, you just want to optimize for leadership. Like there was a lot of really great salespeople at that company, and I learned the craft from awesome salespeople. Like the managers and directors there were awesome. So while I didn't have a good product, I had a great learning environment and I had great leaders to learn from. And so I would say like that's the thing to optimize for early in a career. But then, at some point you want to hitch your wagon to a winner. And especially if you're in leadership, like it's way more important in your first manager or second line leadership position. If you're not in a great company, you're cooked. Like no amount of sales heroics can get you around out of control churn and a poor performing product. I say this a lot to folks, like you're way better off being the number 2 person at a number 1 company versus being the number 1 person at like a number 7 company. And you see people make this mistake like over and over and over. It's like my first VP of sales job. And then you look at the founders and you look at the product and you look at the market and investors, you're like, this is DOA. And you got your first VP of sales job, but you're probably going to be out in 9 months or 14 months. And it might actually look like a sort of a poor mark on your resume. And so you're better off to go hitch your wagon to like somebody awesome who's a great leader with a winning product and be the number 2, because you're the VP of sales at some crappy company. You're really just a glorified manager. You're managing 4 reps versus you're the number 2 for a great CRO. You might have 4 managers under you and 40 reps. Like who's more senior? Director at the good company or VP at the crappy company? It's easy to let vanity make you make the wrong decisions there.
There's so much goodness to that. But the one thing I want to call out is up front, which I think is lost on a lot of founders when they're looking to hire a sales leader, is how critical it is that person has sold a shitty product before. I see so many sales leaders who like got their first job at Salesforce and then went to Stripe and then went to, Google and then now join a Series A company. And when that happens, they really struggle because if you've never, my first sales job at Meltwater, this is not an exaggeration.
That's a grind.
We had 1,000 people at the company when I joined. 960 were in sales. So we had 40 people for everything else. Like, I don't even know who built the product. I'm not sure that we had more than 5 engineers in the company. I'm not joking. Like this company,
that's crazy.
This company was basically selling the shittiest product on the planet. And now they've made a lot more investments. The company's much better. But like back in 2008, 2009, this company was a disaster. And it was the same thing where you couldn't rely on, there was zero inbound. There was the most common response you got when you talked to somebody who had heard of Meltwater is, this product's a piece of shit, I would never buy it. So you had to like be really, really, really resourceful in order to try to get deals done. And then after spending 2.5 years there, where, I grew to be the number one rep in the company, I got to Glassdoor. And when I got to Glassdoor, the product was amazing. We had insane product market fit.
So fun.
And I was like, wait a minute, this is what sales is supposed to be like. And I very quickly became the number one rep at Glassdoor because it was just so much easier to sell. And I had so much experience in like the psychology of sales and tactics of sales, because nothing ever went our way at Meltwater, that I knew how to make something from nothing, that when you gave me a huge advantage, I was able to capitalize on it really quickly. And I think that the inverse of that, which is that if you only know how to take something that's great and sell it, and then you walk into an early stage company where many things go wrong all the time, you get stopped a lot. We call it, getting stopped. How quickly do you get stopped as a leader, as a rep? And I think it's just such an important point that if you've never faced real adversity with the quality of the product that you've sold, that you don't actually really know what it takes in order to sell at an early stage. I feel very strongly about that.
Yeah. And these are good guidelines. And I think especially for the founders listening, that doesn't mean that no one from good companies will be good, because there's, plenty of examples of people that have been at Salesforce for a decade that do have success when they go into a startup. But you need to dig into the DNA. I think all too often in hiring, we revert to superficial indicators. And this could be the reverse. It could be like, oh, they were at Salesforce, they must be awesome. And so you hire them and they're not awesome. Or it could be the opposite. Hey, this person's only sold great products, so they couldn't possibly be good in a startup. Well, that's not true either, but they are indicators of what to dig into in an interview process. And really what you're trying to get to is like the core foundation of the competencies you need in that role. And so, the challenge hiring somebody from Shopify, because when my people cold called at Shopify, hey, it's Kyle from Shopify. Hey, how you doing? People were like excited to hear from us. And it was like the weirdest thing. I couldn't it just like baffled me as somebody who had never sold a great product before until Shop. And what you're looking for is the DNA of do they understand the science of persuasion? Do they have grit and resilience? Even though they've had a good product to sell with name recognition, have they demonstrated the things that underlie sort of that superficial layer at the top? And I think that's where founders go wrong is they on both sides of this coin. They're like, oh, they went to Stanford and they were at this fancy company, they must be awesome, but they've never had to solve problems on their own from first principles because they were a second line leader at a massive company and they never took the initiative to go take on a big project. And like, I was a leader at Shopify, a big company on paper, but I had my hands in everything. Like we were rewriting our global sales positioning. So I'm like, hey, let me be the revenue sponsor on that. And then we were looking at comp. And so I was like deep into all of this comp stuff. And so even though I was at a big company, I was still like deeply problem solving, but you didn't need to. There was other people in my similar seat that like weren't going to go take on those like gnarly complex things. And so my advice to founders is like dig under the surface to get to what you really think is important in your job, and know what is your jobs to be done framework, what are the competencies you're hiring for, what are the specific skills, and then what are the characteristics, like what are the values, how do you intend on running the company, and like get to that.
We're on the topic pretty deeply now of what should a founder look for when they're looking to bring an early stage leader on. I know this is well known kind of, in many circles, but just for the, couple people that have been living under a rock, maybe you could just describe, at what stage you joined Owner, like roughly in terms of revenue, size of sales team, people, et cetera, and roughly what stage you're at now. Obviously don't need specifics, but just roughly, about revenue, about sales team size, et cetera, so that we can get some context around that. And then I want to go really deep for a few minutes on what founders who are at that first stage of where owner was when you joined, which are many companies, obviously, what they should be looking for in hiring their own Kyle Norton. So maybe just give us some context first, and then we'll dig in.
I joined Owner in June 2022. They were 2 and change million ARR at the time, and I inherited a manager and 4 reps. 2 of the reps weren't a fit. We parted ways pretty quickly, and then we sort of rebuilt from there. All 3 of those, the manager and the 2 reps that I kept, are still with the company today and actually crushing. Now we're right around 30 million ARR. The sales team, as of like Monday, is going to be about 60 people. And I have the onboarding function as well. RevOps, enablement, partnerships, and BD, and whatever else is sort of like related. So that's the journey.
Okay, so let's go back to one like frontline manager, 2 to 4 reps, 2 million in ARR and change. So that's a pretty unproven product, and a pretty early, as far as early goes, that's pretty early.
It's early. It's so early that I said I would never go back to a company this early before I took this job.
Okay. I want to dig into that in just a second, but before we do that, let me ask the primary question, which is, so what made you join Owner, and what was Owner's CEO looking for at the time, and how did you guys find a match there?
I look at joining a company the same way that a venture capital investor looks at making an investment. It's team, product, market, and it's sort of the allocation of importance to those 3 things that basically separate most VCs. I am in the camp of it's like 70% team. And really, when I say team, that's just founders. Like, almost everybody else is going to come and go, as hard as that is sometimes to admit. And there's lots of people who stay for a long time, but the caliber of the co-founders determines basically everything after that. The quality of people they can attract, their ability to fundraise, the culture that's set, the sort of environment. And then, you want to opt for a big market or a company that's in a market that could become a big market. Like when Shopify was founded, e-commerce was a tiny market, but obviously has become something very different. And then product quality. And so like at that stage, you're grading on a curve, but is this a good product and is it getting better fast? And those 3 things were very much there in Owner. So I'm a part of I'm an LP in GTM Fund. They invested in Owner. I was a part of the process to get GTM Fund into that deal. Basically, like Scott, who you and I both know well, Scott Barker, was like, hey, we got this deal. It's shit hot. We like absolutely want into it. So I need you to get on the call with the founder. He's like, this is not a diligence call. He's like, I don't need diligence, because it's sort of Owner's like Shopify for restaurants, and I was at Shopify. He's like, I don't need you to tell me if you like it or not. Like, just you're in full sell mode. Convince this founder that taking our money is great because he'll get access to people like you. So I hopped on with Adam, and I was just like insanely impressed. And my model for founders when I think about taking on advisory or cutting checks is basically like, are they a force of nature? So do they have like a will and an unnatural will and drive and resilience? And do you, like, when you're on a call with them, do you leave with like a sense of awe? So that's like number 1, force of nature. Number 2 is, are they a learning machine? And I remember on my first or second call with Adam, I recommended this book. I'm like, oh yeah, actually I like this book on positioning. It's called Made to Stick. And he's like, oh cool, I'll pick that up. And then 18 hours later, he texted me. He's like, hey, I read that book you mentioned. And he had like all these questions, not clarifying questions or help me understand, like really nuanced, like detailed questions that require a level of sort of understanding and insight that I totally didn't expect from like an early stage founder that doesn't have a sales background. So learning machine is the second piece. the third piece is founder market fit. Like, is there some reason why this founder has the should have the right to win in this market? And Adam basically started this business for his mom and was deeply passionate about it. And then the fourth thing, which is often missing, is do they have enough humility not to blow it all up? Because there's a lot of founders who are incredibly smart super learners and they're a force of nature. The Venn diagram of that person also having an overlay with the humility circle is like pretty rare. But then you find those people hit a wall at some point because they won't listen to their investors, they won't listen to advisors, they won't listen to their C-suite, and they just sort of drive the thing into the wall. And so that is what I saw in the two co-founders, Adam and Dean. And I was super happy with Shopify, and the timing like couldn't have been worse for me to leave. I just had my second kid. Like, things were good. I love Shopify as a company. Like, I still am like I haven't sold a share. Like, I'm a massive fan. But I just could not take this opportunity because I thought I might regret it for basically the rest of my career, just watching them rip on LinkedIn and knowing I could have been a part of the journey.
Okay, that was amazing. And we're going to take a lot of what you just said and turn it into like a little infographic of like criteria. I love the Venn diagram. I love your description, not just the categories, but your description of how to assess for those things, because I think it's pretty well known that like, you want to join an awesome founder, but like what makes for an awesome founder, and you want to join a product that's great, but like at that stage, most products aren't that great. And so like, how do you think about that? And your idea around founder market fit, I really enjoy and like as well. The only thing I'd add to it is the quality of investor that's backed the company, I think also makes a really big difference.
It can, for sure.
When I was considering Glassdoor, I had two other offers, and both of the offers were, it's funny, you're some of our, we've lived parallel lives in some way. So I had the opportunity to go be the number one at two shitty companies. I didn't know they were shitty because I was 24 years old. I didn't know anything, but I had the opportunity to be the number one at two, like less well-established companies, or to be the number two at Glassdoor. And I was leaning towards, I actually initially said no to Glassdoor's offer because I wanted the VP of sales title. I wanted the, the 3/4 point equity that came with it. Glassdoor was offering me a very, very small fraction of that. And so I said no. And the CEO, Bob Homan, who really liked me in the interview and thought that I had some potential, but was obviously like confused as all heck as to how to make this decision, wrote me this legendary email on like Sunday night. He basically, he and I were so I rejected his offer. And then he wrote me back to try to get me to reconsider and come in. And I said, no, I'd already made my decision that I wanted a VP of sales title or whatnot. But he basically broke down for me how I should be thinking about evaluating a startup. And for context, Bob was, an early employee at Microsoft, had built a really successful business with Rich Barton around Zillow, and had built, he was a very, very successful CEO before joining or founding Glassdoor. And he basically broke down. He's like, look, Benchmark backed Glassdoor. Like, Benchmark does 8 deals a year. They are one of the like most premier VCs, and Rich Barton is on our board. He's like one of the top 10 most respected venture capitalists. Like, these things matter in terms of future access to capital and trajectory of the company and whatever. And he was like, you're not, he goes, 3/4 of a point of nothing is still nothing, but here, I think they had offered me, if I remember correctly, it was like 0.02% of the company is what it was. So I was basically getting like 1/34 or whatever of the offer that I was getting from these, or 137.5 of the offer that I was getting from these other. He was like, it could be worth a lot more. And he tried to help me understand and assess it, which the fact that he took the time to do that, given the fact that I was, not that special of an employee, spoke a lot about it as well. But I ended up meeting him back in person, talking about it. And then he told me I was the only salesperson that he had ever interviewed who negotiated purely on equity. I didn't care about the base. I didn't care about the commission. I only cared about the equity because I had figured out somewhere along the line that the only thing that mattered was getting a big enough portion of the pie of the equity of the company, that if the thing worked out, that it would matter. And I ended up actually taking a lower base, lower kind of smaller commission plan, obviously uncapped, but lower percentage in order to get a much larger equity stake in Glassdoor, which when Glassdoor got acquired for $1.2 billion meant that I had the opportunity to pay off my parents, like, help my parents with their stuff, and then have the opportunity to found Bravado. So I wouldn't have ever had the opportunity to even start this company because I wasn't in the financial position where I could take risks like that without that exit from Glassdoor. And so it's a very long-winded way of getting to a simple point, which is like assessing the right company and picking the right winner can change the trajectory of your career, of your life, as it has for you, I'm sure. And it's just really, really meaningful.
Absolutely. I think like the caliber of investors is important. And like Jason Lemkin is on the board here, who I've followed since like the earliest days of my tech sales career and have a tremendous amount of respect. And it's Redpoint and it's Jack Altman, like really, really savvy folks that I respected. The one thing I caution is to like be careful of reasoning by analogy, because I see this all the time. And similar to like, don't just look at the resume, like try to get to what's underneath. The investors are really important, but you want to do your own diligence to understand, okay, they have seen these three things, team, product, market, but like do your own diligence on that to make sure that what they saw is still there. Because potentially you have another 12 months of data that didn't exist. Like maybe Andreessen did the seed, maybe Redpoint did the A, but now you're 12 months in and there's much more data to make that decision off of. And you can know whether or not the market is like really viable. You can know whether or not the product has the traction that you originally thought, because when you're joining a $2 or $4 million company, like there is still tremendous risk there. And so you want to be careful of not only reasoning by analogy and using those as indicators, as important indicators, but then doing your own diligence to dig in. And so when I say team, product, market, I talked about my founder model, but then on product, like ask the questions about viability. What's the churn rate? What is the NRR? Like is revenue with your customer base growing or contracting? Who are you losing deals to? What are your top churn reasons? What are your top close loss reasons? Like there's a lot of ways to get product fidelity, and nobody does that. And when I was interviewing with the owner, I sat down with the COO and he pulled up the spreadsheet of like the entire growth model, historical numbers and projections. And we went through it like line by line. Like, tell me about this. What about this assumption? You have this going from X to Y. Like, what's the plan to get there? And that is like a very important trust or confidence building exercise for a potential revenue leader to do, because this is more important than an investment. This is more important, like Benchmark, who doesn't write a lot of checks, they write a handful a year. You make one of these decisions every like 2 to 4 to 10 years. So arguably your company diligence should be quadruple what a venture capital investor does. What revenue leaders are doing that level of diligence? Like almost none.
Yeah, very, very, very few. And I love your point around the basket approach that a VC takes versus you only get one career and you're investing something far, far more important than money, which is your time. And there's no second there's no take backs on that.
And you can only make a couple wrong choices before people start questioning your resume. If you have 2 9-month stints, 2 9-month VP of sales stints, I will personally judge that. I'll be like, I don't know. Like either they have no business acumen because they don't know how to pick companies, and that's a concern. I need people with business acumen, or they're bad at their job. So you have to be really choiceful about it.
I couldn't agree more. What about the other side, Kyle? So now let's talk about what Adam was looking for, or maybe I'll ask the question this way, which is, if you were advising, which I'm sure you do, founders of companies that are between the 1 to 3 million, have a couple sales reps kind of stage, and now they're thinking, okay, I want to bring in a head of sales, a VP of sales, in order to take this thing from 2 to 20. What are the heuristics? What are the criteria What are the things that you would want to spend some time evaluating, understanding, both on a resume for initial screening, in conversations, that you think leads to the best possible chance of success?
So I definitely spend a bunch of time on this. You and I both advise a company who I've helped place a head of sales at who's doing amazing. And so this is the framework that I give them. So they need to be really considerate about like, what are the specific jobs to be done of this role? And you can't be generic. It can't be like acquire customers and like grow revenue. No. Like, what are the specific things that this individual needs to do? Because in an enterprise environment, those jobs to be done are going to be quite different than in an SMB environment. In enterprise, they have to be on the road every week with their reps, closing deals. They need to be like the super duper rep. And they're going to play that role for quite a long time. Like at League, I played that role for 3 straight years. I was in all of the biggest deals. I was on the road constantly because we were selling enterprise, versus the jobs to be done for my role at owner were quite different. I was never on the road. We sell completely digitally, and it's all about infrastructure and systems building and building stuff that's repeatable and scalable. And so every founder should read the book Who. I've stolen a lot of how I think about hiring from this book. And one of the things that Who talks a lot about is just like the importance of scorecarding, the importance of sitting down and thinking very considerately, like, what are the jobs to be done? What are the competencies I need to screen for? And then what are the experiences that I'm looking for that indicate they can do that? And so this is the model. It's jobs to be done. 1, competencies and skills. Number 2. So what are the specific things that you're looking for evidence of? Values and DNA is 3. So they have to want to run their team in a way that's congruent with how you want to run a team. And when there's incongruency, like no matter what you do, it won't work. If you are a top-down authoritarian and this person is like a bottoms-up and in like empowerment engagement leader, like it's not going to be a good fit. And then the final thing is you just have to consistently validate, test for performance. Like you want to find a history of excellence. Like, is this person great at what they do? And so the common pitfalls is, again, like reasoning by analogy. It's saying like, oh, I want a sales leader, so I'm going to go hire somebody who is a senior person at like at a big company that's similar to mine. Well, the jobs to be done there as a second or third line leader at Oracle or some mega company are like very, very different than the jobs to be done at a small company. At a big company, one of your main jobs as a senior leader is just like internal politics and fighting for what your team needs and getting deals approved and having procurement sign off on stuff. Like that is the reality of that job. It's very challenging and it's a different set of skills. And I had to learn very different things to be successful at Shopify than I apply as a startup leader. But like, so what are the jobs to be done? And are you really carefully assessing that it's there in the candidate? Then like the real skills, and the skills need to be applicable to your market. So they need to be stage appropriate, customer appropriate, and like deal size appropriate. So you can take somebody from a stage or 2 away from your current company. So if you're at 5 million, if there's like a stage of 1 to 10, so there's 0 to 1, 1 to 10, 10 to like 25, 25 maybe to 75, and then there's like real scale at 75 plus. Like you can, if you're at the $10 million mark, you can go grab somebody who's done it at like a $75 million company. That you're still in the range because they were probably there when it was only like 17 or 20 million. I can pull people down.
Yeah, but if you're looking for someone, if you're at like 2 or 1 or 3 or something like that,
you're really looking for a bridge. And so this is the hard thing to understand for sales leaders. And I think this is the advice I give to founders, and it feels like I'm doing a disservice to sales leaders, but I think we should be honest about both sides of this equation. Most of the time, for most companies, the sales leaders you hire at like 1 to 3 million, you're really just trying to get a person to get you through the next 24 months. And either that person scales in a way and learns and grows in a way that is pretty remarkable and rare, and then they can keep being your VP of sales or CRO, or you're going to layer that person with somebody who's seen the next parts of their journey. And both founder and revenue leader should see that as a success, should see that as like a massive win. And you're going to keep your equity. You're still going to have the equity of an early stage VP of sales, which will be quite meaningful. And you're going to get to now learn from somebody who's been there and done that and can help you become the person that then can be that person the next time. And I think, again, this comes back to sort of like vanity and ego. And Lemkin talked about this on my podcast with him, and he talks about this a bunch externally. Like, how you react to getting layered is like very telling. But a founder should just be honest. It's like, hey, look, success here looks like you getting us through the next 24 months and us then bringing in. So you're going to hire a VP of sales. Don't hire a true CRO at $2 million. Hire a VP of sales, somebody who's like maybe got second line leadership experience, is stage relevant, has dealt with your type of deal. Doesn't need to be only marketing. Like if you're MarTech, you have to hire from MarTech. No, but if you're MarTech, you can hire somebody that's sold to like a similar profile with similar deal mechanics. Don't hire a deep tech salesperson at that point, or like somebody who's sold only to DevOps. But then success is great if like you're the VP of sales and you get layered by a CRO and that person is like the one who helps this whole thing grow to the next couple of stages. And I think that's the honesty that oftentimes is lacking.
And specific to SMB, are there parts that you would orient a founder? Because again, if your deal sizes are 100K, 200K, 500K, you're selling to Microsoft, you're selling to, these big conglomerates.
Yeah.
The type of sales leader you need at a couple million ARR, I think, is markedly different than what you're dealing with, where, the ASP, I don't know exactly what owner's ASP is, but I guess it's probably somewhere in 10, 20K range.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So somewhere in that range, like that's for you to get to 20 million ARR in a couple years at a 20K ASP is, if I can just do some quick math, a fuckload of deals. And so like, and so like the capacity planning, the CAC, the quota, the velocity, the training, the culture, how much you can afford to pay a single rep, like all of those mechanics are specific to SMB. Maybe you can get a little bit into that piece and then we can transition. So touch on that from the leader perspective, and then we'll just transition right into the rep perspective of that and the team perspective of that.
So that is the jobs to be done part of the framework that founders need to get really considerate about, and really understanding what the jobs to be done of that individual are. Because if you're selling a $500,000 solution, you only need 5 or 10 reps to get to like 10 or $20 million ARR. So we're not talking about somebody that needs to operate with a ton of scale and systems and whatever. My company, we've got 60 reps at 30 million. Like there's a very different skill set that you need to be able to do that and grow at this velocity. And so for the SMB founders, I would say you absolutely need somebody who's like very systems oriented, very data centric. They need to have a love for and a depth in coaching and leadership. Enterprise reps don't need a lot of leadership. Like, pay them a bunch of money, make sure they can hit their quota, give them a good product, and like they're gonna happily chug on. They are very financially motivated. Oftentimes later in their career, they don't need all the like hoopla and engagement strategies. But I'm hiring like 40 or 50 people this year in sales who are all going to be in the first couple years of their career. Like I need to have a love for coaching and a love for enablement and learning and development. And so like that's the key craft you're looking for out of an SMB leader. And then all the systems building. They have to know how to work a spreadsheet. They have to understand how to do a bunch of stuff in Salesforce. They have to be able to think in systems and really have that systems engineering mindset, or else like maybe they can get you to like couple $1 million, but then you will have brute forced your way there and grown on vibes, and then everything starts falling apart because you don't have the systems, and it takes so long to build the systems that then you see a bunch of these companies having like this really bad stall out. As the sales leader gets more than an arm's length away from every rep, things start falling apart because that leader was making things happen on his own. He or she were pulling the strings themselves as opposed to building a system that can do it. And we, in our business, we've been hired very early for RevOps leaders and enablement leaders, and we've been very systems oriented, which means like we've been able to plow in reps who come in, hit quota right away. They set new records for first and second month deal volume, like every cohort, because just the system gets better. And that's what you need for SMB leadership, I think.
Okay, let's talk about that, because that's a really meaty topic, and it's one that I think is often very misunderstood by founders, by those who are at the $1 to $2 to $3 million range as they're trying to get to 20. One of the things that in the SMB, and we're going to focus on SMB.
Okay.
One of the things that we see all the time, I hear all the time, I'm sure you do, is a feeling of like, yeah, we just need like a leader and some reps and we'll just make it happen. And this idea that, things like RevOps, things like sales enablement, things like a tech stack, investment into building the foundation and the infrastructure are needed in advance of getting to the maybe when they thought, they're like, oh, we'll bring in someone to do RevOps at, when we get to 15 or 20 million, we'll bring in someone to do enablement when we have like 20 reps, and obviously that's going to be too late. So maybe talk me through your journey at Owner in terms of, again, so let's pick the thread up at 1 manager and 2 reps. Today you're at 60. Talk me through the hiring plan. When did you bring in the first RevOps person? When did you bring in enablement? How did you think about the ramp program, the onboarding program? Like, would love to understand how you built the system there.
Yeah. And so one sort of note of context, I think it's a chicken and egg problem, because you need to have RevOps and enablement in order to grow at a certain scale. But you don't want to spend that money unless you're confident you can get that scale, because it's expensive. Like you have a $200,000 a year leadership level individual spread across 6 sales reps. You're like, that your CAC just changed materially. But if you are pretty confident that your 6 reps are going to be 18 reps within 12 to 18 months, then you have to make that investment, or else you're going to feel the pain later. And so I think founders need to be honest with themselves about like, what's the trajectory we're really on here? Like, do I have the evidence that I'm actually going to grow at this trajectory and I should make these investments now? Or like, do I not quite have the product traction that I want, and churn is a bit of an issue, and I should take a more like moderate approach? Because you can find that capacity through contractors. And so I even started that way with Owner. Both my RevOps and enablement leaders started on contract, because I just couldn't afford their full-time salaries spread across like a small cohort of reps. We were close to a fundraise. We had to be cash management conscious, like every startup. And so I would say like pull the trigger on it early. Start with people on contract. That's a great place to go. You got to vet very carefully your contractors here, because there's a lot of like not great people in this space. A lot of out of work RevOps leaders. They're like, I'm a consultant now, and they don't know what they're doing. But vet them out, and as soon as you have the evidence of trajectory, then like bring that person in house, because you'll go like lots and lots faster. So I had those people working on stuff by like 3 million ARR probably, and then they were full time in the business by 4 or 5.
Wow.
For sure.
That's early.
Yeah, it's funny. It doesn't feel, I'm like, I wish I had done it earlier.
Really?
Yeah, like, because it's easy with hindsight to then see, it's like, okay, well, we we went from 5 to 12 in or more than that in like 12 months. And that cost looks insignificant when you're comparing it to like a 15 million or a $20 million run rate. But at the time, it just feels like it's real dollars. But we have a good product and good market, so like we could make that bet. And we have scaled up those teams like significantly over the last 6 months. So there's like 4 full-time headcount under RevOps. There's 3 full-time headcount under the enablement leader. And like we don't have enough capacity because I'm building this revenue leadership academy. We're rebuilding like all of our product training, onboarding got a facelift. We're like doing a bunch of positioning stuff. Because my mindset now is like, what does a $75 million ARR company look like? And how fast can I be that level of execution? Because we're going to be there sort of in the blink of an eye. It's crazy how this time bleeds by.
So I love that. And I really appreciate the gut check that you need to do with your leadership team and with the company around, are we sure that we are ready to make this investment now? Because I do think that there are companies where the product isn't there yet, the market isn't there yet, they don't have the proof point. And so that can lead to challenges. But I think that also comes back to our initial discussion around vetting the company more thoroughly to ensure that like you're not wasting your time at a place that's going to kind of putter along. You need to go into a place where you're flexing in order to really help step function change the revenue growth of the business. I want to touch
just one more thing, like to make it a little more concrete, because I think maybe I was opaque there. What you're looking for is evidence of go-to-market fit. And there's an article that Mark Roberge wrote called The Science of Scaling, and he talks about thinking about go-to-market fit the same way we think about product market fit, and understanding like, do we have evidence that this thing is repeatable and we could take in leads and reps, mix them together, and then have revenue come out the other side? And once you start to see that repeatability and you can onboard 3 reps, 2 of them get to quota on like a projected basis, and maybe 1 sort of gets there, but it's always hard to hire. Then you can say it's like, okay, I have go-to-market fit. Now I'm graduating out of like prototyping and like pilot team building, and I'm now into like grow this thing. And so when I had 6 to 8 reps, we were very much in this like, we're prototyping. I'm trying to get the economics to where I want it to be. It doesn't have to be exactly 4-to-1 LTV CAC, but you need to see the chart improving, and you're like, okay, like I can reasonably project out another quarter and I'm going to be at that LTV CAC number. I'm going to be at this productivity number, and then, hit the gas on those roles, and then think about like, 6 months ahead of, look out 6 months and just like project out where you think you'll be and what type of team you'll need to be then, and start trying to hire those people now, because it takes a long time for them to hire and ramp and then actually do stuff that helps. So I would say like, when you have that go-to-market fit based on Roberge's definition, that's a good that's a good place to say like, make these infrastructure investments pretty swiftly.
Totally makes sense. Let's talk about the rep profile a little bit on the SMB side, because you touched on this. You said, at enterprise, I'm looking for, you can kind of get away with more senior people, less need for leadership, less need for this training, onboarding, ramp structure. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn around and kind of get high paid, high profile reps, and one rep a small number of reps can get to a big revenue target because each deal is worth so much. Obviously, that's just not true in your world. I'm curious how you think about the profile of rep, maybe the first 5 or 10 reps that you bring on, how that changes once the systems are built. So maybe let's start before the infrastructure, before the systems. What are the reps you're looking for SMB? And what are you like willing to pay out? And how do you think about quota to comp? And how do you think about like all of that versus once the systems are built, what does it look like at that point?
Yeah. As Jason Lemkin says, when you're in that startup phase, you're really looking for pirates and romantics. you need to hire people that really do care about the mission. I know it can seem sort of like a platitude and just something that like people say, but when you're only $2 million in ARR, everything's broken, everything sucks. Like, it's just like constant chaos and fires. And so you need people who love that stage of the journey and have been there before. Like you can't hire, a public company enterprise rep to come be your rep at 2 million ARR because they're used to having their decks built for them and they've got the positioning statements all tied up and a BDR to do this and an onboarding person to join or a solutions engineer to join the call and basically like show the product for them. And none of that really exists early stages. So you need stage appropriateness. You're looking for pirates and romantics, and you're looking for people that are like Renaissance reps, basically. People that could sit down and like make a deck. If they're like, oh, I actually think the positioning should look more like this and this and this, we'll sit down on a Thursday night and like remake the demo deck because they've got some sort of inspiration from a previous meeting. That's who you're looking for there. I opted, so switching to SMB, at Owner, I opted to go hire a more established rep and pay more or in the early days to ensure we just had a caliber of people that could come in and like get the job done. And so the thing you have to be careful of is like those people still need to be adaptable. You need to hire for curiosity and coachability because sometimes you hire established people and they just want to do it their way and they can't adapt. But I opted to find proven performers, pay at the top of the SMB market, and entice people to take the risk just because like the comp was really great. And, it helps to have some brand profile and like be a company that people know of. But that was a lot of the strategy. Now that we are very well established, onboarding, enablement, the coaching and development, the management team is like very, very well run. Now I'm really trying to hire earlier career folks and groom people from the start. And we are really trying to promote from within as much as we possibly can. And that is going to have a very like different cost profile.
What are some of the questions you would ask? Let's go back to the pirates and romantics. What are some of the interview questions that you would ask or signals that you would look for outside of like they've done this in the stage appropriateness and stuff? But like when you're talking to them, what are like 2, 3, whatever questions that you would ask in order to assess if they are this Renaissance rep that you were mentioning?
So I really just get into the how. Like, hey, you've hit quota bunch of times. You closed like a $1.2 million last year. Like, walk me through how. Like, how did you get to that number? And people that are enterprising and creative are going to have a bunch to say there. Well, we were doing this, but the data wasn't good in Salesforce, so I like went and had a buddy pull a list of like these types of companies, and then I built my like prospecting sequence like completely different, and they're just going to have a bunch of stuff that they did that was off script. And that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for those creative ways that they got to their number. And I really just want to understand like how, like just get into the nitty gritty of like, how did you get to your number? Tell me about your gnarliest deal. What was the hardest deal, the deal you're most proud of? Because you're going to understand a bunch of their creativity. And then I'm trying to get a understanding of like, was it them or were they around it? Because sometimes you've got an awesome sales manager who's solving all their problems and doing all this innovation and they were sort of just executing. But I really want to understand what role did they play in this whole thing. The how is really important.
What role, if any, do you use demo in the interview for? This is a topic that I love getting into because it's so controversial. There's some people who are like, I basically one of the things I hear founder, and let me set the stage for this question a little better. founders will say this to me. They will say, salespeople are good at selling themselves. So ultimately, like where the rubber meets the road is I want to see them demo the product. And they make the sales rep demo the product of their own product, right? So like if you're interviewing to be a rep at Owner and you currently work at Shopify, they'll have you demo Owner to Owner. There's some who will say, well, you don't know enough about the product and like it's hard with a surface level to be able to get depth. And so I'd rather have, if you're currently a Shopify rep applying for a job at Owner, I'd rather have you demo Shopify for me so you can show me that part. And then there's a final group of people who will say demos aren't the right way to assess. So here's the third thing. I'm curious where you stand on that.
Yeah, I definitely don't want them demoing their current product because there's such a massive asymmetry of information. Like, how do I know if they're doing that well? And especially if you're early stage, what I'm trying to uncover is resourcefulness, curiosity, learning aptitude. Because think of how fast startups change. So if you can't visit our website and our YouTube page and listen to me drone on a bunch of podcasts and figure out how to position Owner and do it on a demo, then you're not a fit. Earlier, now we can be a little more flexible, especially because we're hiring earlier stage people. But at a couple $1 million ARR, they absolutely need to demo your product, and they need to be able to figure that out because you're seeing their mental agility, and that is like when you're talking about Renaissance reps, that is one of the most important things. Like, do they have the creativity, agility, resourcefulness, scrappiness to be able to do that well? And sometimes people, like applicants will get a call with a rep and be like, hey, like, how do you position this? How do you position this? And they're like demoing it just like you teach your team because they sort of got the answer key. And some people are like, oh, like, I didn't really like that. That's not the point of the exercise. No, that is exactly the point of the exercise. Like, what could you do? How could you possibly go get answers to these questions to do a great job at this? And so for early stage companies, absolutely, like you want them pitching your company. You want to see how they did it. And after they demo, I asked them specifically, hey, so like Sahil, like walk me through how you prepared today. And they're like, oh, well, I like did some research and done it. And I'm like, okay, what type of research? And I'm like, I really want to know, like, walk me through the details of how you got ready. And then they start unpacking and they're like, well, I did this and I did this. And then I was like, I filled out a demo request with a fake restaurant, but nobody got back to me. So then I used a real restaurant. But then, like, I'm trying to understand how they problem solved. That I still love that in a more mature org, but it's not as much of a complete necessity. And so I'm like definitely in favor of doing demos and unpacking their prep process for sure.
I love that. Can we talk a little bit about the team side of it? Like that's on the individual rep. On the team side of it, one of the things that's en vogue to discuss these days on LinkedIn is remote versus in-person teams. And I think there's a feeling. So maybe start with is Owner in-person, remote? How are you guys structured?
So we have been remote since the jump. Our entire sales team is remote. But I just announced on Monday that we've opened up an office here in Toronto, a sales hub that opens up on January 27th. And we're now hiring all new BDRs and SDRs locally that will have a 5-day-a-week in-office expectation.
Why did you decide to do that?
So I spent a lot of time with a lot of sales leaders trying to figure out this question, because earlier last year, I would ask this question and people were like, oh, it's got to be an office. Office is the best. But then I would like unpack it. And again, people are just reasoning by analogy and they're like, oh yeah, it's better because blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, what data? What data do you have to support that decision? And nobody had anything. They weren't doing A/B tests. They didn't have a good comparison. And largely I would talk to companies and they would say they just brought people back in an office. And then I would ask them about their remote onboarding enablement. And it's terrible. It's like, yeah, well, no wonder remote wasn't good for you guys because you were like brutal at it. And we do, I would say, like a really good job at remote onboarding and enablement. But then I started to finally get to some companies that had done more proper A/B tests and had done side-by-side experiments, and the data started to become like pretty unequivocal that reps ramped faster. And I've got like pages of notes, but some people had a 20% faster ramp. Some people had like people ramping in half of the time. Productivity was better by like 30 to 60%. You shared some data on our podcast about in-office versus remote attainment for SMB reps. So I went deep. I was reading like academic research and really trying to make an informed decision. And I think, so the rationale is people will ramp faster if they're around a bunch of their peers, including their managers. Productivity will be better because you're not just like sitting alone in your apartment trying to like muster up the courage and motivation to make calls. I think like it's just way easier to do that when your office is a vibe and people are like banging out calls and having a good time, and you know, you can get help at arm's reach. And I think retention will be better because, you know, young people, especially like moving to a new big city, they don't know a ton of folks. Like the sense of community is really important, and all of the engagement research shows that how important community is. And obviously, it's much harder to build community in a remote environment. So we're moving everybody back in. This is not return to office. Our current remote team can stay remote as long as they want. They're free to come into the office, but moving forward, everybody's going to get hired in the office.
When you say everybody, just to be clear, that's SDRs and BDRs, or is that also AEs?
SDRs and BDRs and inbound AEs. Okay. Inbound AEs will almost exclusively be promoted from within, from that BDR group. But then I don't have the gates established right now. I want to learn a little bit more, but at some point people will graduate from 5 days in office to hybrid to fully remote. Your data was really informative here, and I started asking this question more frequently. And so at some point, a rep is tenured enough and understands your business well enough that they no longer need or are benefited by the office experience. Like they know how to manage themselves and run their calls, and the work-life integration of being remote becomes more important as they're, you know, in their late 20s and maybe have a partner and are thinking about leaving the city. Like I think the attraction and retention advantage at some point outweighs the learning advantage. I don't know at what point that is. The data is going to tell me that, but we will graduate people out to hybrid and remote eventually.
I didn't expect that answer, and I'm super interested in your thinking around it, because from the outside in, you said you joined Owner in June of 22. We're now in January of 25. So we are, you know, what is that, 30 months in. And in 30 months, you've increased ARR by roughly 30 million. So, you know, you would think if it ain't broke, why are you trying to change something? Given the investment that you've made in enablement, in, you know, onboarding these people, it doesn't seem like there's a problem. Maybe there is, and I'm missing it, but I'm curious how, you know, it's one thing to say, hey, other companies have found the data to suggest that having a in-person team leads to higher productivity. But has productivity of your junior team been a problem for you historically? So
it's getting better every month. In fact, every quarter productivity on a per person basis.
So then if it ain't broke, why fix it?
Because that is where companies, this is where companies get into problems. They think that doing the same thing into perpetuity will get them to their eventual goal. But so we probably hired like maybe 20 BDRs this year, 15 to 20 BDRs.
Yeah.
And we likely need to hire 35 to 45 next year.
Yeah.
Those are just bigger numbers with more volatility and variability. And so I think taking risk off the table is important by like having everybody co-located, especially as we really try to have everybody manufactured from ground up. Like getting tons of SDRs in, graduating them through BDR, senior BDR, AE, and so forth. I think like complacency is the number one enemy of success. And I said this to my team today. I'm like, hey, by the way, we had a super successful 2024. We had an awesome all hands on Monday where we like went through all the cool achievements, and the data is wild. You're like, wow, we did that. That's awesome. Everybody patting themselves on the back. And the message I shared with my team is like, look, like every great company has a brush with death. Tesla, SpaceX, Apple, Google, Facebook, like they all have famous examples of almost running themselves off the road. Facebook with mobile, Tesla with production, if you've read the Musk bio, and famously Apple.
Facebook with changing to Meta and investing everything in metaverse. And Anyway, yes, go on.
So like for us to think we're not going to have a brush with death is naive. And things have been pretty awesome for the last like 2 or 3 years. And so I said to them, I was like, look, and we're gonna have a probably pretty great next couple of quarters because everything's lined up nicely. At some point, something will go off the rails. It'll be like some competitive reaction. It'll be some black swan event. Something weird will happen to this business that's going to make it things way harder than it is today. And we need to be ready for that, and of the mentality that like we are expecting something bad, something to go wrong, so that we're mentally prepared that when it does go wrong, it's like, okay, cool. Like I expected this. Did we expect things to be perfect forever? No, that would be silly. So like go in with the preparation that things will go wrong. And when it does happen, then it's much easier to react to.
And so you feel like this is an area where you're de-risking something that you think it's working well today, but if I was to play the tape forward, I think that there's a possibility that we will see volatility and reduction in performance on our like most junior employees on the sales team, and potentially. And so in order to potentially de-risk that, we're going to co-locate and train and invest in this group in Toronto. And in doing so, we will set ourselves up potentially to avoid one of the pitfalls that I could see coming down the road. Is that kind of the assessment?
Yeah. And every year the bar goes up. I have the expectation that I can drive down CAC by a material amount. I have the expectation that I can grow the company faster. And, this is one of those big levers that on a productivity ramp, output cost basis can really have an impact. And so I've validated a lot of my assumptions pretty heavily with the market. One of the companies I talked to saw over a 60% difference in activity volume between hundreds of BDRs that call it 100 BDRs remotely versus their 2 in-office experiments that have roughly like 30 to 40 BDRs in it. A 60% activity difference. And this is a company that's extremely well run and has a great great understanding of how to do remote, like best in class. And yet those teams are just like smoking everybody. And so I think like you have to make bold bets even when things are going well, or else at some point growth slows. And I intend on growth being faster in 2025 than it was in 2024.
That's such a amazing owner mentality as an executive, to say I demand more out of my team despite having overshot and overachieved last year, just raises my own bar of expectation, and that I'm going to be a student of trying to figure out what are all of the you say lever, I say lever, but there we are. all of the levers that you can pull in order to accelerate growth. I mean, I just feel like that is something that a lot of sales leaders are doing. I'm in conversations that I have with a lot of sales leaders, there does seem to be this desire to say, hey, last year we grew revenue by 400%, but that was on a small base. Next year, of course, it's going to slow down. And so I want to set quote unquote realistic targets, i.e. I want to sandbag a little bit on the business so that I can set myself up to be successful. as opposed to what you're describing, which I think is the dream for every founder, which is to find somebody who says, last year was great, but I know we can do better, and I'm going to keep finding ways to do better because that's what my job entails. It speaks volumes to your mentality as a leader, and I think it's super super cool, and I'm excited to see how it works out.
Yeah. So the number I got from finance, I took that up a material amount as like, but this is my number. We have a joke internally. There's always a Kyle number. Like every month there's like the number from finance, and there's like always a Kyle number, which is like 20% above it. And that's not the roll up. That's not like, any funny business. It's just like, yeah, okay, this is the number we've said, this is going to get us to our target, but like, let's go 15% above that. Like, I think we can do it if we do these things. And that drumbeat and that intensity from the top, I think, has a crucial impact on how people operate. Because the moment you take your foot off the gas just a little bit, the moment you feel happy about where you are and complacent and you want to give yourself a pat on the back, that's the moment things start to like just crack at the seams ever so slightly, and that compounds over the course of like months and quarters, and all of a sudden like growth has slowed, and now you're like no longer that exciting to invest in, and then your round isn't as good, and if your round's not as good, then you don't attract the super top talent anymore. Like, success is so fickle in our business. And so like my message to revenue leaders is like, no matter the number that you get from your finance team or the board, like, make your own determination of what's possible, and don't go shoot for the number. Go shoot for what's possible. If I could really like run the table, like, then where do we end up? Because that's the company I want to run. That's the company I want to be a part of. I want to be a part of like a insane success story. And we don't do this job to like check a box. You need something different.
Well, I mean, I honestly I feel like I'm Lex Friedman today, not in the quality of my podcasting, but in the length of podcasts that I could go for, solely because I feel like I've just begun to scratch the surface with you. And I have so many questions I want to ask you about product positioning. I want to ask you about in differentiation. I want to talk to you all about the tech stack that you've built in order to support and enable and get there. But I also want to be respectful of your time and not keep you forever. Let's do another one ASAP. I want to do a part 2 with you this quarter. And this time I want to get all into, the product positioning and differentiation and stuff, because it does change quite dramatically. But before I go, I want to leave you with a quick hot fire round robin. And I've got 2 questions that I want your POV on. The first question is, what is the best advice that someone gave you early in your sales career that you think that if today people were to give this advice, they might get canceled by the mob? What's something that's considered controversial today that maybe you really took to heart early in your career?
The vibe has shifted. So I would have previously said that like you can't expect a successful career without tons and tons of hard work. Like it feels like the last couple of years, hard work became taboo, and then like you weren't allowed to ask for hard work as a leader because you were triggering your employees or whatever crap language people use. But I absolutely believe like you can't expect an extraordinary career with an extraordinary effort, and people want one without the other, and it's just not possible. Unless you are so much more talented, you are 1 in a million in terms of like raw ability. Okay, maybe you don't have to work that hard to be super successful. That's not me. That's not 99.99% of people. So just like hard work is essential if you want to get anywhere. And hard work is not 45 hours a week. Hard work is like 50, 60, 70 hours a week. Like if you really want to have a remarkable career, like that's what we're talking about. Like the real hard work.
My wife got canceled by posting that the best thing she ever did was to work weekends early in her career. and the tweet went
Yeah.
super viral, and like literally like thousands of people were like, how dare you suggest that people spend their weekends working for the man and like whatever. And it was
Yeah.
just insane to me because I never had a weekend off for the first 5 years of my career. I rarely still take a weekend off. Like the idea of not working for, 48, 60 consecutive hours just doesn't make any sense to me. So it's
And
crazy.
you can do the 40-hour work week thing. That's cool. Like no judgment, but just don't expect like really remarkable career outcomes. Like because somebody with your equal talent is going to do 60 hours a week.
That's right.
And they're going to get the job. They're going to get the thing.
And then the last question I'll let you go is, what is one place that you have used your sales superpower outside of work where it has benefited you? You got a quick little story of how you use sales in order to help get you out of the situation or help get you into a situation that you think is kind of fun to share?
Oh man, everywhere. My wife hates it when I do this. Because she finds sales so uncomfortable, but like, I just love negotiating. So we renovated our house a couple of years ago and bought all new appliances for the kitchen. And I had like 4 different appliance distributors on the go. And I was like, hey, this company said this, can you get it for me for that? Like, oh, I don't know. All right, well, like, send me the best you could do. And I would screenshot the best that they could do and send it to the next person. And my wife is like, you're just having a time, aren't you? You're a complete sicko. I'm like, yeah, for sure. Same thing when we bought a car. So I probably saved 25% on the appliances. And it's like, like thousands and thousands of dollars to buy all new appliances. I probably saved 25%. I got crazy deal on my car because I was doing the same thing. I called every dealership in Ontario and I was like pitting them all against one another. And I love to negotiate because they like, when you're in a position like ours, you got to be a good negotiator. You have to, and like, I know all the tricks. I've read all the books. And so I know how to play the other side. That's probably the biggest place.
You, sir, are what we would call a real sales savage. That's amazing.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Kyle, I'll let you go, brother. Thank you so much for being on the pod, sharing your wisdom and insights. And we're going to do round 2 this quarter. I'm going to hold you to that.
All right, let's do it, man.
All right, take it easy.